All right, I got some sound here. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for stopping by. My name is Vinny DaSilva, and I'm a developer evangelist with Vuforia. And I'm here to talk to you guys about augmented reality. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Arthur C. Clarke. Quote's a little bit overused, but I think that any of you guys have worked with augmented reality, you guys kind of know that the first time you show somebody, it's a bit of a magical moment. And it's been a really awesome year for augmented reality, and I'm really excited to share some stuff with you guys today. Now, how many of you guys have used Vuforia in the past? All right, a couple of you. Cool, awesome. So this talk here will go through an introduction of some of the new offerings that we're having inside of Unity. Okay, so you guys are at Unite. You guys use Unity. You guys are going to continue using Unity. You create your content in Unity, and then what you do is you use Vuforia to take your content from Unity and bring it into the real world. Now, because Vuforia is integrated into Unity, you can expect that every time there's a new version of Unity released, there will also be a new version of Vuforia released alongside it. So Vuforia helps developers put their content into the real world. And we do this by using advanced computer vision. And it's this advanced computer vision that's indistinguishable from magic. When you use Vuforia, you're giving your application or your game or your experience an eye into the world. And you can see the world and perceive the world in different ways. Now, when we're thinking about putting content into the real world, there's two primary categories that's available to you. You can put your content onto objects, like posters, books, board games. Most Vuforia applications today take this approach by putting content onto objects. Now, we can also put content relative to the environment. So you can put it on the floor, on a table, floating in the middle of a room, relative to the environment. And that's what ARKit and ARCore does really well. And out of curiosity, how many of you guys have used ARKit? All right, ARCore? All right, cool. So we'll go into a little bit of detail in that stuff. But most of what you've seen on YouTube or you sort of experienced with ARKit is this type of technology where we're working with the environment. So we're going to first talk about objects, and then we'll go into environments a little bit later. So placing content onto objects. Now, I don't know how many of you guys are VR developers, but VR developers have this crazy challenge or this problem that they need to solve where if you want to introduce objects into your virtual environment, you also need to add interactivity that makes sense. You need to sort of meet those expectations of your visual objects. And in augmented reality, we have a different set of problems, but they're similar in the sense where when you have objects in the real world, the users have an expectation of how those objects behave, and when you augment those objects, they need to behave and sort of react as one would expect. So if we want to meet the player's expectations of affordance, we need to be able to augment objects. Okay, so there's lots of ways to augment objects with Vuforia. View marks is one of the really interesting ways that are available to you. So with view mark, you can place a view mark onto an object, and not only can you augment that object, but you can also uniquely identify that object down to a serial number. So that's really good in industrial use cases where you have lots of equipment and you need to define exactly what piece of equipment you're dealing with. And if any of you guys are working with any sort of like digital/physical toy or game, it's really also interesting as a sort of unlockable, right? So you can have some kind of physical packaging or some kind of physical toy or whatever that will unlock digital content. Image targets are our most popular way to augment objects, and this allows us to augment objects that are sort of flat and planar. So these are great for books, brochures, posters, cards, board games, anything that's sort of flat and you can put an image on. Perfect for image targets. If you're looking for an additional dimension and you're looking at some kind of 3D packaging or boxes you can use some of our cuboid technology, and this allows us to track an object no matter what way we're looking at it. We can recognize it from all angles. Cylinder targets are a lot of fun. They allow us to augment objects that are cylindrical, right? So bottles, like wine bottles or any kind of product that's sort of in a bottle or cup shape. The example I showed earlier with the mug, that was a cylinder target. And if you guys are looking to augment an object that's small, sturdy, small and rigid, a really good way to do that is with object targets. You scan the object first, and then you're able to augment it. And all of this is available today with Vuforia 6.5 and Unity 2017.2. And what you'll notice is that all of these objects have something in common. They all have natural features, intricate visual detail that allows us to be able to recognize the object in space. And when we can recognize the object in space, we can augment it. But what about objects that don't have this kind of visual detail? Objects like cars. Cars, if any of you guys have been working with AR, you know that it's really tricky to augment cars. Appliances, 3D printed objects or parts, industrial equipment, and engines. All of these have been traditionally really tricky to augment because there's no intricate visual detail there. So Vuforia has come up with this technology called model targets. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to augment objects not based on their intricate visual detail, but based on their geometry, on their shape. So what does this mean? This means that you can provide a model file, either a mesh surface model or an engineering solid model into Vuforia. Vuforia will take that geometric information, and then we'll be able to create a target out of it, allowing you to augment it. This is available with Vuforia 7, coming out probably later this year. So what's fun about this is that it allows us to be able to augment objects that were not designed with augmented reality in mind. So you can take an object that's already existing in the marketplace and add new functionality to it via AR. Okay. So one of the things that we've done is we're integrated into Unity, and we have a lot of these. We're creating samples that are in the asset store that are available to all developers. And one of the things that we're doing is that we've created these playing cards. So you can go home today or go back to your hotel room, download the samples from the asset store, and use these cards that are on the screen, and you'll be able to start working with Vuforia right away. Now, I do have some cards down here, so after the session, feel free to grab some. These are available for you guys to pick up, so to play around with Vuforia. Okay, so with these cards, I want to show a quick device demo, and assuming that we can switch over here to the device. Oh, got upside down. Okay, cool. All right, so you guys already see on the screen here, we have our playing cards, and we have some content already on it that's already being augmented. And just want to point out a couple things here with Vuforia. So the first thing is that you'll notice that the content is really sticking to these cards. It's really sticking to the content. And I can pick it up, and I can sort of flip it over. It's really precise. So we know the exact orientation and position in 3D space. Now, not only can we do that, but once we understand the content and these objects, we can have interactivity. We can have these objects know about each other and interact with each other. And this works not only for cards, but any of any of the objects that we support. So this could be a box, this could be a 3D model, this could be any sort of thing that Vuforia supports. You can have this sort of interactivity there. And you can even have certain game mechanics. In this case here, we have this mechanic where we need to fill up the oxygen tank on the astronaut, and they're going to go ahead and do that. So this is some of the stuff that you guys can start playing with right away with Vuforia, with these cards and the samples that are available in the asset store. Can we switch back over? switch back over? Thank you. All right, cool, awesome. Okay, so just a quick little recap. So we have our image targets that allows us to be able to put content onto flat images like these cards. We have our cylinder targets that allows us to be able to augment objects like this. And I just want to point out a couple things here that I find really interesting. The first one here is that in this case here, we're not rendering something in like totally rendering something on top of the cylinder, but we do have something that's interacting with it that goes around it. So once we can recognize the objects, we can have our virtual content interact with physical content as if they were in the same space. The other thing I want to point out here is that we do have some shaders that we include in, so that way you can see that as the drone is flying behind the cylinder, it gets occluded. So that adds to the realism of the interactivity. It's a little dark here, but this, as you can see, that there's a box, and what we're doing here is we're adding in a game UI onto the box itself that's sticking to it. And another example of the multi-target is that there's a toy in the market called the Merge Cube. They leverage Vuforia technology, and what they do is that they sell these cubes that Vuforia recognizes, and then they help developers create this content, and that way they have a whole app store that works on these Merge Cubes. I think they're a lot of fun. Here's a quick little example of an object target. So this is something that we scanned in. It's not a cylinder. It's not a cuboid, but it's something different altogether. So what we're doing here is that we're adding some game components to this hab. Okay, cool. So that's how we augment objects with Vuforia. I showed you guys an example of using the cards. Went through some of the functionality. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go into Unity, and we're going to show you guys how easy it is to get started with Vuforia in Unity 2017.2. So here I have an empty scene. It's a little hard to see, but here we have an empty scene. And the only thing that I've done ahead of time was I loaded in some assets, just so that way you guys are not waiting for the import. So the first thing that we're going to do inside of our scene here is that we're going to go into the player settings in Unity. There we go. Scroll down all the way to the bottom. It's a little bit tricky to see here, but maybe this helps. So at the very bottom, you'll see XR settings, a new panel that's in Unity 2017.1, I think, and you'll see Vuforia Augmented Reality support. Now you want to go ahead and check that box. If when you installed Unity, you didn't include Vuforia as one of the components, as one of the platform components, this will turn into a hyperlink, and it will take you to where you can download that component for Unity. So I'm going to go ahead and check that off. Okay. So now that we have that, what we're going to do is we're going to go into our game object menu, and we're going to see Vuforia. And then in here, it's a little blurry, but at the very top is an AR camera, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a bit. We have image, multi-image, cylindrical. So all of the objects that Vuforia supports are going to be available here for you to use. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to introduce an AR camera into our scene. And because our AR camera is going to be representing our main camera, and it's also going to be a representation of the device's camera, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the main camera. We no longer need that. And then now that we have our AR camera in there, I'm going to go back into the Vuforia menu. And I'm going to select image. So this is for image target. And there it is. And you'll notice that by default, our image target has the astronaut card that we showed earlier. Right? So, and you can change it to one of the other default cards. And you can also upload your own content as well. So this is where you would do it. So now that we have our image target in our scene, we have an object and we can have a preview of it. And this is a representation of what it's going to be like in the real world. So what this means is that whatever content you put inside of your game object, inside of your image target game object, is going to appear when Vuforia is running. So I'm going to go ahead and pull in here something I brought in earlier. So I have an astronaut, and I'm going to pull that in here. Oops, wrong place. Oh. All right, reset the scale. So there we go. So now we have our astronaut on top of our card. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click play. I have a regular webcam attached. All right. And if it's not too dark in here, there we go. So we see, I actually think I have some other things going on here, but what we see here is that our astronaut is loaded, is put right on top of our card. And you can put whatever content you want. Whatever game logic or game content you want, you can put it right in there. But you can see that I detected pretty quickly. The same process is very much the same whether you're doing an image target or cylinder or a model target. Model targets are a little bit different because they involve a little bit more work, but essentially the workflow of what it takes to augment an object is pretty much the same. This is it in like full speed here. All right, cool. Now, if you're anything like me, you've been looking for a really good excuse to get a 3D printer. And model targets was my reason to do it. When I knew that we were working model targets, I'm like, I am going to get myself a 3D printer. And we were thinking about, like, once we have a 3D printer, like, what kind of fun and interesting content can we make that's going to sort of really highlight what we can do with model targets? And we have this whole Mars theme going, because Mars is really popular now. And we decided to 3D print the Mars Viking lander from the 70s. And that's what we did. We got it printed, and I have it up here on stage. And then we were thinking, okay, well, what kind of cool, fun experience could we do with the Viking lander that is going to sort of highlight some of the awesome things that we can do with model targets? And our president, Jay, said, like, why don't we just set it on fire? And I am always looking for a reason to set things on fire, so that's what we did. So let's try this out here. So I have something that I loaded previously in Unity, and then load it right there. Okay, so now what we see is that it's a little blurry there, but there's a flamethrower on the side here, and I'm just using some of the Unity assets. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on my flamethrower. And you're going to notice that as I bring the flamethrower down, it's going to bounce off of the model, and it's going to start setting it on fire. All right, so there we go. And a couple of things I want to point out here is that the model is, the content is really sticking to the model. And so all the nooks and crannies are sort of in there. So it's really precise. And the other part of it is that I've actually broken this model as I've been traveling, but it still recognized it. And the reason for that is because it doesn't need to be exact match. It looks for something that's very close, and then it matches it. The other thing I want to point out is that because we're using geometry, the color doesn't matter as much. So this could, like, a lot of times people have cars, and they have like, oh, we want to augment cars, but you have different color cars. So that's something that this allows you to do because we're detecting it based on its geometry. The other thing to point out is that if you have like industrial equipment or construction equipment, it gets dirty, it gets grimy. Because we have this sort of flexibility of recognizing objects that are not 100% the same, it allows us to be able to recognize objects that are dirty or grimy or have wear and tear. All right, cool. All right, so that's a quick sneak at model targets, and that's also going to be available with Vuforia 7 coming out later. Just a quick little, this is another example that we did with the Viking lander as well. So in this case here, instead of setting on fire, we just set up a whole scene around it. A lot less destructive. Okay, cool. So that's some of the stuff that Vuforia some of the things that some of the Vuforia features that allow developers to put content onto objects. But now, what about putting content onto the environment? Back in 2013, Vuforia came up with this technology called Smart Terrain, and we used world-facing depth sensing cameras, and I think at the time we were using a prime sense sensor that was attached to a Android tablet. But what's awesome about this kind of technology is that it gives us a really rich and detailed information about the environment that we can use inside of our applications. But that kind of rich mesh, that kind of rich detail is only feasible if you have really fancy camera technology. And by that, I specifically mean world-facing depth sensing cameras. And the only thing that's really available today that has that kind of technology is something like the Tango or the HoloLens. But we all have these really awesome phones in our pockets, and what we really, really want is we want to have this kind of environmental information available to us on our phones. But we can't get that same high-resolution mesh detail with a regular RGB camera. But what we can do is we can use that RGB camera along with the other sensors on the phone, and we can determine where flat surfaces are. So we can detect floors and tables and sort of any sort of planar surface. And that's where Vuforia introduces something called ground plane. And ground plane allows us to do that. It allows us to detect any flat surface and put content on top of it. Now, there's obviously been a huge demand for this kind of technology. And ARKit and ARCore does this really well. That's what they're sort of looking at to do. Now, the reason why Vuforia hasn't done this in the past is because we strive to democratize augmented reality. And first, to reach that mission, that goal, we need to be able to support all devices everywhere, not just some ARKit devices or some ARCore devices. We want to have the same experience across all devices wherever possible. And doing this kind of technology cross-platform is really challenging. It's really dependent on a very robust calibration procedure, a very involved calibration procedure, where we take information about a particular frame that the camera provides us, and then the IMU data, and we tie those two together and do a lot of awesome math, and we're able to do this. But it's really dependent on this crazy calibration. And also, the other part of it too is that not only do we need to have all this sort of information about the devices, there's also a computational limit, right? So if you have a device that's too slow, you may not be able to compute all of this in real time to get the experience that you want. So for this to work, we need to make sure that every supported device undergoes a calibration for this all to happen. So one of the things that Vuforia is doing is that we're introducing this sort of technology under the covers called Fusion. And what we do here is that because of this fragmentation of different sensors, different chips, different cameras, and then we have things like ARKit, we have things like ARCore, Tango, the Windows mixed reality stuff. So all of this stuff is in the market, and we're dealing with, as a developer, we have to figure out where do I develop against? What do I use? And while there are some abstraction layers on top of some of this stuff, what we're looking to do with Vuforia is because we not only want to have this working on certain devices, we really want it working in as many devices as possible. What we're doing is something called Fusion. So what we do here is that if you build with Vuforia and you deploy and you put it on the App Store, and then somebody with a brand new iPhone X downloads it, we're going to leverage ARKit to put your content into the environment. But somebody downloads that same application and runs it on an iPhone 6, ARKit is not available there, but instead of just saying, hey, you're out of luck, what we're going to do is we're going to leverage our own ground plane functionality, so that way the end user has the same experience as somebody with an iPhone. And the same applies for Google's ARCore, right? there's very few devices today that actually support AR Core. So if you happen to have a Pixel, or if you happen to have a Samsung Galaxy S8, then we'll leverage AR Core. But if it's not there, we're going to leverage GroundPlane for that same functionality. So just talk a little bit more about the fragmentation or the state of the market as far as devices go. So right now, the data that we have for devices that are running Vuforia, right now there's about 65 models of iOS, and of these devices, 36% of them currently support ARKit. With Vuforia GroundPlane and Vuforia Fusion, we're aiming at 94% of the devices by the time the Vuforia 7 rolls out. Android's a little bit trickier. There's 40,000 devices worldwide right now that are running Vuforia. And of these, less than 1% of them support AR Core. I can literally name them off of one hand. And with Vuforia Fusion, we're aiming at getting 20 to 30% of all devices by the time Vuforia 7 rolls around. Now, these are not only devices that are popular in North America or Europe. We're looking at the most popular devices worldwide, and we're trying to figure out what the greatest coverage is for that. So you guys can get started with Vuforia 6.5 and Unity 2017.2 today and augment objects and do all sorts of fun stuff with that. Vuforia 7 will be coming soon, and that will include our GroundPlane technology along with model targets. If any of you are really excited about model targets, we do have an innovator program that allows you early access to model targets. Check out our website for information on how to join the innovator program. And yeah, I encourage you guys to grab some cards, go home, download some samples, and start playing with Vuforia right away. I don't know if we have time for Q&A. If anybody has any questions. Thinking not. OK, well, again, my name is Vinny DaSilva. Thank you guys all so much for your time. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or look for me around the halls. I'll be glad to talk with you guys. All right, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.